previous location, across the street, I actually began, I made a presentation 4 or 5 years ago, and that's really the origin of this book. So let me tell you a little about myself and the iBreakfast. We've been running a forum for entrepreneurs in the digital media era, pretty much since the beginning of the digital media era. Recently we began a program called Startup-Palooza, and starting about 1999, we began going around the country taking startup pitches, bringing investors and putting them together. And what we did is we brought investors from New York, where we could, took them to other cities, and then we found out we didn't need to bring investors from New York to other cities. All we had to do was say we were from New York, and it emboldened the investors there to act like New York investors. And what that meant was they told them the truth, which was ugly, and people loved it, especially in LA. So the truth is, are you fundable? And you know, we came up with a great name, Startup-Palooza, and we get a couple of, usually academics, but some wiseacres, a couple of people have had one or two too many, and they say, well, why would you have a show, a conference, or a meetup, if you will, with startups called Startup-Palooza? That's Startup a Loser. And my response is, shouldn't point that out. My response is, you know, all startups are losers until they figure it out. No one is born fundable. You become fundable. And it's really important to understand this because, you know, I'm sure you read the papers, you read the blogs, and you see millions of dollars flying around. You see people getting funded. This guy got $5 million right out the bat. Peter Thiel funded a space rocket. What was he thinking? And they were blowing up. What is going on? And the answer is, there's a code. There is actually a model that investors use, even if they don't know they're using it. And what they're doing is, they're discounting you against this model. So I'll start by asking who gets funded the most. Anybody have any idea?
Those who've already started something successfully.
Excuse me?
Someone who's already started
Pretty
something
good.
successfully.
Okay, somebody started something successfully, right. So when you read in the newspapers about Elon Musk starting another venture and he gets $100 million to get started, or somebody gets $10 million to get started, that's not you. You have to ignore that. Because those people are few and very, very far between. The people that get funded the most, now I'm saying this anecdotally, so can you hear me in the back? Yeah. So I'm not going to give you the data on this, but common sense should help you agree with me. The people that get funded the most are somewhere in between. And you'll see who they are in a second. So let's start out by looking at the entrepreneur hierarchy, because there really is a hierarchy. So at the top of the pyramid, as you pointed out, is the serial entrepreneur. So if Elon Musk decides tomorrow he wants to grow pomegranates in Nicaragua, and he just needs $100 million, he'll probably get at least 99 of it. And a serial entrepreneur is somebody who's done this before and done it well. And even within the serial entrepreneur environment, there's another hierarchy. We won't get into that. The second level on this hierarchy is what I call the pedigreed startup. You haven't heard that before, but I'll tell you what that is. And pedigreed startup is somebody who has 5+ years of domain expertise in a large corporation or a significant corporation. So they really know something. In the course of being in that space, they discovered an opportunity that only somebody in that business would really understand. They figured out the product, they have the team that can make it or have made it, and they have the customers waiting to buy. And the market is significant. If you are that person, the check is probably in the mail. Then we have the up-and-comer, that's somebody with a bright idea and some credentials. Then we have the Me Too. Now, Me Too's get a bad rap. Me Too is somebody has, oh, I got another healthy frozen yogurt. It's a bit late in the game, or another cupcake. But if you have another cupcake or a frozen yogurt with a new wrinkle, well, you can execute better. Let's just say you own the farm that makes the milk. I don't think they put milk in there, but if they did, you own that farm, you could do well. It's Sue Leonard. So they get a bad rap, but if you bring something to the table, and then there's everyone else. Okay, so that's the hierarchy in general. So let's go back to the pedigree startup. Because what I'm going to tell you about the pedigree startup, just take a look at this. That actually is the model. It doesn't seem like it's the model, but that's because investors know they're not going to find this person every day. In fact, they probably never find this person. This is a mythical creature. Has anybody read Hero with 1,000 Faces? Anyone know Joseph Campbell? Okay, one guy. I'm glad I left it out of my book. And there is a book, by the way. So Hero with 1,000 Faces is in 1946 or so. A sociologist came to the conclusion that all stories, all hero stories, all myths are based on this one basic story, the quest story. And it has a formula. A young person probably had some terrible thing happen in the past, and they're going to right this wrong, and they have to go across to a foreign land. This is Odyssey. This is Homer. This is Harry Potter. In fact, you show me a big adventure movie, and I'll show you how it fits in to the hero myth. It's called the motto myth. And it's at the point now where Hollywood actually hires people that have gone to schools that teach popular culture studies. So it works, and Disney absolutely lives by this. In fact, I can tell you in a movie where they're going to start showing up, they're going to have to meet a mentor who kind of was in the game but didn't quite go all the way. And he shows up right near the end. Then there's a magical character, R2-D2. I mean, I can go through this. It recurs all the time. Well, guess what? Very similar. Investors are looking for this, but they know they're not going to see it. So what they do is they discount against this possibility. They look at you and say, could you be this person? Are you a young version? Are you a senior version? We'll get into the senior version in a second. But that's the model. It's this. Now, this is not a theoretical model, by the way, because although I abstracted it from all the, I must have seen thousands of presentations. I've seen thousands of investors. But what makes me different is that I hear what the investors say after the entrepreneurs have left the room. So I know what's happening on both sides. So I can articulate for you what they're not telling you. But just to show how this really worked, a few years ago, I met probably the most successful early stage investor ever. You've probably never heard of him. His name is Harry Edelson. Edelson. Harry Edelson. Harry is an old guy. Made his money in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. He is the guy that financed pretty much all of China's high-tech industry today. The guy made hundreds of millions, and he claims he wrote a book called It Takes $1 Million to Make $1 Billion. Just $1 million, and you can make $1 billion. How did Harry do it? By the way, he really made a lot of money. 1980s money. It got lost in the internet bubble, but believe me, he made real money. The guy has seen billions happen. Here's his list. It's on his website. You can go there today. Now, Harry has a great pedigree. He's an analyst on Wall Street. He's a CFA. But look at this. It's very specific. It's pretty much what I told you, except you'll never be this. These aren't startups. These are companies that have been around. They've got some traction. They have some revenues. And he can project from that. And he really, if you remember the picture before, you see his hands? When those hands get a hold of your books, you better watch out. He really did his numbers. Okay. That's what he wanted. Proven management with entrepreneurial spirit. Remember? A lot of managements are very stodgy. This is a management that has to have get-go, right at the top. Attitude. A sound financial plan. And he meant sound. He was an accountant. Innovative technology. Back in the 80s, that really meant something. Today, that's harder to find, but it's still out there. It's always hard to find. And by the way, if you look at his website, you will recognize none of the companies. But they made hundreds to billions. Okay? Hundreds of millions to billions. Proprietary advantage. You're going to hear this over and over again. A thumb on the scale. You know, like the Eskimos have 57 words for snow, and the Arabs have 100 words for stallion. Investors have 100 words for secret sauce. Thumb on the scale. An edge. Something that separates you that other people can't get to easily, if at all. A high quality product or service. Got to be good. Demanded. A large market opportunity. Quite specific. The potential of at least 100 million in revenues. That was back then. Investment liquidity in 5 years. He wants an exit. financial return of at least fivefold. He's being very, very modest there. He wants a lot more than fivefold, but that's the minimum bar. Now, some of these things have changed. Investment liquidity in 5 to 7 years, well, okay, fine if you IPO, but that's gotten hard lately. Market opportunity, the potential of 100 million in revenues. Twitter, Facebook, who knew what the revenue model was? So that's why a lot of people have forgotten about Harry Edelstein, because the model itself has changed. But audience equals eyeballs equals potential ad revenue. So ultimately, there's a value proposition and there's comparables that you would apply to it. Okay. So let's get down to you folks, because I'm sure at the end of the day, beginning of the day, you want to know how it applies to you. So who you are matters. And the business that you present, that you deliver, will vary according, and you'll see why in a moment, to who you are. Salesman, are you the head coach running a team? You're a technologist? Team? Did I mention team here? No. Okay. Impresario. It's kind of a new idea. It's been around for a long time. Somebody puts it all together. Steve Jobs. Couldn't write a line of code. Couldn't build anything. Rude as a son of a gun. Smelt. I think at one point he didn't wear shoes and may not have worn anything else. I've met him and I can tell you, not a nice guy. But he's an impresario. Put it all together. He understood. He had the vision. Why does this really matter? Now here's something that's going to get me disinvited to 1 or 2 lunches, but I'm only reporting what's going on there. This illustrates the value proposition, if you will, to an investor of the jockey versus the horse. Has anybody heard this expression before? Jockey versus the horse. Okay, get used to it, because this is a very, very common concept in the entrepreneurial world. In fact, just yesterday I listened to an interview with Barbara Corcoran, and the number one thing that she looks for is not the idea, but the entrepreneur. Not the concept, but the person. The jockey, not the horse. I don't know if you remember Willie Shoemaker, if you're old enough to remember Willie Shoemaker. He didn't care what horse he got onto. He won. So the jockey, I would say probably is 60% of the deal. The idea is 40%. I have seen deals that stunk, but the entrepreneur was so compelling that the investors came to him or her with the plan. They said to him, you know what? Don't do that. If you do this, we'll back you. It's in my book. So here's a situation. This is actually a lawsuit. This, by the way, was a site that I was working on. Our job, our mission was to abstract dense information, complex information to very, very simple visual. Not an infographic, but just a visualization. So a couple of years ago, a lawsuit was filed. I believe they're going to trial next year, but you never know, they may settle. The supposed founder of Pinterest, a young fellow who was a law student at Columbia University, claimed that Pinterest was his idea, and that he had a relationship with a certain investor, I mentioned him in there, and this investor found a way to crash and burn his company, probably because this guy was so busy becoming a lawyer at Columbia Law School at $75,000 a year. He didn't have time to work on the business plan, and gave this idea to 2 budding engineers from Google. I think one was from Google. I'm not sure who the other one was. And by the way, a young budding ex-Google engineer is the 5+ year expert that everybody wants to see. If you have that on your resume, check could be in the mail. Okay. So he claims that that idea originally was this horse, ridden by this jockey who happened to be a law student. Jockey was too busy being a law student to make that horse go anywhere, and so the investor removed the jockey from the horse and replaced him with another jockey who had plenty of time to do what he was supposed to do, and was an engineer to boot, so he could do it with his own 2 hands. And they raced across to the finish line with a company called Pinterest. It's similar to the Facebook story, different particulars. I have no idea what happened, but I can tell you that this story is almost of mythic quality in the world of investing, because investors see great ideas driven by bad people. They will never invest if they see, when I say good, if they see bad ideas driven by great people, they will find a way, because they believe that a great person will turn that around. In fact, referencing Steve Jobs, in Walter Isaacson's book, Ross Perot, remember Ross Perot? That's sucking sound going on. Mexico. Ross Perot met Steve Jobs at some kind of cocktail party at the very moment that Steve Jobs' company, Next, which is the in-between company between Apple and his return to Apple, he had a company called Next. It was about to go broke. Literally was about to go out of business. And he met Ross Perot. Ross Perot liked him, and he said, how much do you need? And in fact, I think in the book, he offered him. He said, I'll give you $20 million. And in the interview with Walter Isaacson, he said, I'm not going to try and imitate his accent, although it's tempting. He said, I had no idea what Steve Jobs did. But I picked the jockey, and I let the jockey go out and find the horse. Think about it. $20 million. That may have been the best bet ever, because the next that Steve Jobs did was a software company, an operating system company, which was the reason that Apple brought him back in. They needed an operating system, not the hardware, the operating system. And once they brought him back in with the operating system, that became iOS, that became the iMac, that became the iPod, the iPhone, and so it goes. So the right jockey, and this is almost an instinctual thing. Investors look for that person because they believe, and with pretty good reason, that that person will find the finish line. Okay. Now, so what you want to know, how do you become fundable? Now, I could go on for a while, but you know, I got a book to sell, so you got to buy this book, right? But let me put it to you this way. Since we have a model, we know that they're looking for people that adhere to a very, very high standard. They know they're not going to get it, so they compensate. So the main thing about becoming fundable is that for the purpose of the idea that you have, you must match it. You must be uniquely qualified, not just to have that idea, but to deliver that idea. And that's the separation. Now, the idea that you're such a great entrepreneur that they'll find the idea for you is a bit of a fantasy. It really does happen. But it usually happens with a young and up-and-coming person, somebody who's got the whole world ahead of them. Okay? The general rule is the more appropriate you are to an idea, the more likely you are to be funded. If you are a biophysicist and you have a biophysicist idea that is also a great business proposition that you've shown you can deliver, it's an expanding market, and when I say show you can deliver, you are an entrepreneur. You get things done. In fact, Barbara Corcoran, I'm going to quote her since she's the most recent interview, doesn't like people who are too smart. It's kind of like the police department in Connecticut. Remember they wouldn't hire a guy whose IQ was too high? You don't remember? Okay, well, yeah, and there was a lawsuit too, and I think he lost. It's not about how smart you are. It's about how good you are at delivering stuff. And that's an instinctual thing. So you probably hear a lot about passion. Investors want passion. Trust me, the passion that they're talking about is completely different from the passion people are thinking about. So I'll just go back to George Campbell. He is the guy who came up with the phrase, follow your bliss. I don't know if you remember that. That's sort of the passion phrase, follow your bliss. Okay. That's not the passion they're talking about. The passion they're talking about is something that apparently was defined by the U.S. Marines. They did an analysis of who's the best entrepreneur. They came up with this one term, which is grit. People with grit get things done. And that's who make the best entrepreneurs. So The passion they're looking for is the passion of grit. And what is grit? Okay. That is the person who gets smacked down, gets right up again with a smile. They don't argue back. They don't fight with the investors. They don't fight with their customers. They just want to get it done. And those people are quite hard to find. I'll tell you, I don't think I qualify for one, at least not from the perspective of an investor. But that's what they look for. They look for people. And by the way, it may not even be that's your real personality. What it is that the idea that you want to deliver is so important to you that you will take all those blows and get up again smiling because you want it to happen. Now, why is that important? It's important because I will guarantee you that whatever startup you have, you are going to go into the desert. You're going to go into a quiet storm or a big storm. But usually what you'll go into is a place where there's just nothing happening. And so only the person who has that grit and drive and that positive attitude is going to make something happen when the phones aren't ringing, when the emails aren't coming in, when the orders aren't there, when nobody wants to do business with you, when the supplier messes up your product, when your designer screws up the specs, when the engineer messed up a little detail that brings the site crashing down. Okay? Only the person who has grit will find a way to make it happen without letting the emotions get in the way. And that is what they mean by passion. Probably is a complete misnomer. Because most people that I see think passion is, I should gush endlessly about my product. That's not what they talk about. Okay. So, let's talk about defensible business, barrier to entry. What do investors look for that they feel is the thing that's going to make you bankable as a business? So a lot of people think patents, right? Anyone agree with me? I didn't ask. But a lot of people say, you got a patent, that's important. Now it's true, if you have a patent, it's a positive thing. I would tell you most patents that I've seen aren't worth much. I mean, they're not, a real patent is, patent, you buy patents. The problem is you have to defend it. But there are some real patents that are worth something. And usually in very, very technical areas, biotech and what have you, you got to have a patent, all right? Otherwise, not otherwise. In fact, Peter Drucker has a great story, a perfect pedigree story. I'm not sure patents involved, but there probably was some patent along the way. It's in his book on entrepreneurship. It's about a company called Elcon. The fellow was he was a pharmaceutical rep, and he dealt with ophthalmologists, eye doctors. And what he noticed was about half of what they do are glaucomas or cataract removals. Big part of what they do. And in the process of doing this, they have to switch gears. They're not exactly what they're doing. It's pleasant about it, but they're cutting one way, and all of a sudden they have to go and remove a ligament. And apparently, it requires a different tool. They've got to wash up and change whatever they do, and they hated it. But they also knew that if they had a certain enzyme, they could just dissolve that ligament just like that. Problem was, an enzyme wasn't handy. So the guy figured, if I just put a preservative on the enzyme, it'll last in the jar, and I can sell it. This was not an ophthalmologist. This was a salesman. And so he spent a few weeks in his home cooking up various concoctions, and he came up with the right combination of preservative and enzyme. He probably got funded from his previous company or friends or whatever. He was pedigree, so funding, he just needed resources, which he had. Probably could do it with no money at all. I think he used no money at all. Anyway, the company was ultimately sold to Nestle's and then to somebody else in the hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a classic story of somebody who recognized the process, very specific, and it wasn't dependent on a pharmaceutical, and it wasn't dependent on a patent. I'm sure they found patents, but it wasn't dependent on a patent. So that's a good example. And it's a famous example. It's back in the 60s. Okay. So at the top of the list is execution. People who are in flow, that are making things happen, they can get things done. Obviously, if that person also has the thumb on the scale, now thumb on the scale, okay, it's one of these 57 flavors of snow. Investors have a lot of ways of talking about it. A secret advantage, secret sauce. The thumb on the scale is the one that they love the most. It's something where you can do it and get away with it. I'm not suggesting that you cook the books. But if anybody thinks that investors are like capitalists and they believe in competition and they want everybody in on the game, that's absolutely wrong. When it comes to business, investors are actually like communists. They want to control the system. They want a 5-year plan that they own. They want to tell everybody else what to do. They sure as heck don't want open competition. They want the opposite of it. They want, in fact, Peter Thiel, to quote him, has a whole diatribe about how bad investors are because, or actually capitalists are, because they're really not capitalists. They're really not in fond of competition. But that's absolutely true. So, now, think about, do you folks watch Shark Tank? Shark Tank, if you know these folks, actually when you know these principles and then you watch these investors, some of whom I know personally, you will see all of these principles in application. And people look at them differently. The only outsider there is Kevin O'Leary, because he really is into licensing, and that's kind of rare. And if you have a licensable deal, it's usually not fundable. And by the way, if you've ever looked at the kinds of deals that he offers, they're terrible. So, but most of them want a thumb on the scale. So Barbara Corcoran's and possibly the show's most successful investment are these two guys who sell lobster rolls out of a truck. Did you know that? Anyone know that? They did $800,000 in revenues just last year in one truck. Like no overhead, and the price of gas is going down. It's great. So, what is the thumb on the scale? Well, number one, they have a superior lobster roll. Okay, anyone can get a lobster, but most people serve lobster in a hot dog roll. You know, like a Wonder Bread roll or a potato roll. I mean, you got a $10 piece of fish and a 50-cent piece of roll. Come on, get a brioche. There's so many breads to pick from. You can do better. They did that, but anyone can do that. So that wasn't exactly the thumb on the scale. The thumb on the scale was that these two guys were lobster brokers. They lived in Maine, and they knew where to get lobster for less. No one with a truck, or even a restaurant, could really beat that if all they were doing was selling lobster roll. So that's a pretty good example of thumb on the scale. And usually, it's a combination of things. Because if it was just one thing, somebody else could copy you. That's why you and your background matters. At the very bottom, you probably see, and maybe, I don't know, does everyone see this? First to market. Probably a lot of you think, wow, first to market, I'm the first to market. Well, okay, so there's academic research on this. I'm not going to quote it, but generally speaking, from my experience, first to market is a plus. But it's not first to market who usually wins. It's the first to market who's also the best that wins. And that often is the second or third to market. In fact, they have a saying for it, but it's not on the investor side, it's called arrows in your back. You ever heard that before? The pioneers always have arrows in their back. That's how you know they're pioneers. It means they went out there first, they figured out the market, they were the first to market, but they got it wrong. The other guy shot them in the back, they got it right, made all the money. So, take a minute to talk about what investors fear. Now, I had a lot of choices in this. I could have had crosses and stakes, but I chose this visceral picture, as attractive as she is, except for the over-application of lipstick and whatnot. I chose it because I'm telling you, this is a primal fear. If you don't believe me, try it out. The thing that investors fear the most is a lifestyle business. It sounds very innocuous. A lifestyle business. Oh, what could be so frightening about a lifestyle business? Does anyone know what a lifestyle business is? Oh, okay, all right. So lifestyle business, and this is something that investors talk about to each other. See, when I'm in the room, I listen to this. So a lifestyle business is when they invest in you, let's just say you have a string of dry cleaning stores, or some type of web design agency that does just fantastic web design. And they give you $1 million and you go out and set up the stores, you buy all the equipment, and then you hit a certain plateau. And you're doing good. You got 5 people working for you, you're meeting payroll, you go out and lease a Mercedes, get a condo right around the corner, you're living a good life. The only thing is the company doesn't make any profit. At least not enough that the investor's going to get anything out of it. He'll never be able to sell it. He'll never have an exit. And so to him, it's just as if he was at a restaurant and you have his credit card and you're buying the best damn meal you've ever had, and all he can do is look through the window and watch you eat. He's getting really hungry. That's what a lifestyle business is to an investor. So, if you have a business that sounds like it, and I mean, it doesn't even have to really look like it, it just has to sound like it. And that's what they're going to see. And what do you do when you see something like that? You're out the door. So if your business is not going to scale, it's not part of an industry that's going to grow, it looks like it's a nice little thing and you're going to make a nice few bucks, that's what it looks like to him or her. Sounds good to you, but that's what it looks like to them. Okay. The next thing is a zombie startup. I'll stick with the metaphor here. Zombie startup was just a company that sounded real good, and then somewhere along the line, the entrepreneur got tired of it, didn't like it, had a day job, decided the day job paid better, et cetera, et cetera. And then the business kind of, you see a lot of these little businesses, they're sort of ticking along, they're not really making any money, they're not really losing any money. It's just not going anywhere. You can't cash it out, you can't grow it. It's a zombie business. There's probably about half of the startups, funded startups in this town have probably hit the zombie status. They don't like it. And so in both cases, there are keywords, and I'll come to the third one. The third one is a settler. This is somebody who settles. You have a nice little business, and the first offer you get, you take it. It's not a terrible thing, okay? There are some investors who'll be happy with a settler, they feel safer. But I'm going to give you an example of what a settler means. Anybody remember Delicious? .ious or .delicio.us? Okay. So Fred Wilson invested in it. I don't know how much he put in, but it was probably a few $1 million, $2 or $3 million. And the guy who developed it was an engineer from Brooklyn, so he was the real deal. It got a lot of buzz, had a big audience, and after a couple of years, he got an offer from AOL, I think, and he sold it for $25 million. I think Fred got in there for $5 million. Okay, so he sold for $25 million. And I saw Fred talk about this, and he said, I can't blame the guy for selling it. It was a life-changing experience for him. A young guy gets $25 million. By the time he's paid up, he'll probably get 4 or 5. I have another example of this. But for me, I broke even. He settled. That could have been the next search engine. Could have been a billionaire. Not that he isn't. Well, I don't know if he's a billionaire, but he could have made $1 billion. At that time, he didn't have Twitter. Could have made $1 billion. It could have been the next search engine. The guy settled. Broke his heart. Couldn't blame him, but he broke his heart. So, in these 3 cases, and there's others, there are certain keywords that people innocently throw out. And they don't realize that when you use those words, that's what the investor sees. So I'll give you some of them. When the entrepreneur offers to give them their money back early, we'll make sure you get your money back. The investor has to ask for it back. You start offering it back early, it says to him, guy's going to settle, or this is a lifestyle business. Because if you're in high growth, you're not looking to give anything back. You want to keep pushing into the business. I have a bunch of keywords in my book. Honestly, I forgot what they were, but that was the big one. So there's a bunch of things. If the goals are too modest, if you're looking, if you say that we'll make profitability next year, that doesn't say growth. They're just things that a small business would say. We'll be able to survive. I wouldn't say that, but they're keywords that you would use that show up. And if it sounds to them like any one of these 3, and there's a few more, that's what it is. Okay. Now, I think I want to call this short because I'd rather take your questions. But what I do want to say is that the book it's in digital format. You can get it, but it has all these case studies and all these scenarios that we've experienced. Now, a lot of these things, by the way, aren't every other book out there. Some better, some worse. But what I've done in all the years that we've heard these pitches and seen the outcomes, we figured out the responses to it, how you can adapt to it, and and why they're saying those things, when they have these sort of odd rules, you know, what's really behind it? Why did they choose that way? And then finally, since Bruce did ask me, he wanted to know, he wanted me to address you folks as entrepreneurs. Like, what advice can I really give you if you are starting a business? I mean, that's a big task, and obviously it'll come in the Q&A. But I just want to say this, if there's nothing else that you got out of this. Who you are and your background is the most valuable thing you have. That wasn't always that way. About 10 years ago, it cost about $1 million plus you to launch a company. You need about $1 million to get the servers, and I'm talking about in the digital media space, but it did own a lot of other areas except hot dogs and sausage rolls. So back then, whoever you were worth a fraction of what the startup costs were. And back then, startups were fairly rare. Even though it was the dot-com era, they were fairly rare. I can guarantee you saw a lot of startups getting funded, but let me tell you about all the ones that didn't get funded. I saw them. And if you go back to the early 90s and 80s, they were even more rare because the startup costs for a scalable business was so high. Today, you can start a business for almost nothing. Open source software. You have the cloud. In fact, there were deals. IBM was at our event last night. They have a deal where they'll give you their cloud server for a year if you sign up with the program and you qualify in certain ways. So the most expensive thing after that is you. It's exact reversal. And that's why there's been such an explosion of startups internationally. Because the most expensive thing in those kinds of startups, digital media and high tech, is you. So whatever I said about the jockey and the horse is probably twice as true today. So on that note, I want to thank you.